Let's go ahead and continue talking about one of the biggest stories that we've been continuing to follow as it breaks in those new developments. I now want to bring into the conversation legal affairs journalist Meghann Cuniff. Of course, Meghann, we do want to start off this conversation that we're having with you about the very latest updates with Sean Diddy Combs. We still know that he's awaiting trial, which is set for May at this time, but so many developments have been happening in the last few days. Can you sort of walk through initially what's happening in his case there in New York before we jump into other topics as well, like Jay-Z in that case as well?
Yeah, well, one interesting thing is the judge is still deciding on the legality of the jail cell searches that went on for Diddy and that have been cited in some filings by prosecutors. Prosecutors are saying that this is separate from their work, that they are not involved in the Metropolitan Detention Center's investigation of this, and that the documents they obtained from MDC came through a subpoena, that they're just trying to do their due diligence as they pursue this grand jury investigation and a possible superseding indictment against Diddy. And of course, these are the notes that they were saying indicate some kind of witness tampering or things like that. But his lawyers are saying that this is a real violation of his constitutional rights and that these notes were taken in violation of attorney-client privilege. So the judge is still actually trying to decide that. And he issued an order the other day asking for prosecutors and the investigator on this jail cell search to submit affidavits by January 17th, talking about their roles in the case, their communications with each other, in their role in the investigation, in the searches. Because remember, prosecutors are saying that, hey, we didn't really have anything to do with this. So that's where that's at. And then they're talking about some pre-filing deadlines for his May trial date, some pretrial deadlines. And we're looking at April deadlines for witness lists and exhibit lists. So they're getting ready to go through the motions on that. And it's so far looking like a May trial date unless there's a superseding indictment.
And when in that case, of course, what is the possibility that there is a superseding indictment? Is that something that's fairly common there in the court system, especially with this being such a high profile case? I can imagine with all the work and the effort that's gone on behind the scenes, they don't want to miss anything to anticipate that they're getting it right the first time.
Right. I don't know if it's common, but it's not uncommon to see superseding indictments. And in a case like this, where he's actually charged with conspiracy, conspirators as co-defendants, it is perhaps more common to see a grand jury investigation into a possible superseding indictment. I definitely think it's still possible that we see one, because we haven't heard one way or the other that this is not, that the grand jury investigation we've heard about has been confirmed. So prosecutors have every reason to want to get him to get co-defendants and to delay the trial, but that is not just a reason to bring an indictment. But I do think there's a chance we're gonna see a superseding indictment.
I think it'll be interesting, and as we're continuing to follow this case, we also know that this isn't the only lawsuit that Diddy is currently involved in. Another big name that's been dragged into this as well is Jay-Z. We do know that there is a lawsuit that involves both of them that was filed by the famed attorney Tony Buzbee. Can you give us an update on where that stands at this time? I know there's been different filings back and forth between, of course, Jay-Z's lawyers, Tony Buzbee. This has been very interesting to see play out in all the headlines, as of course Jay-Z is hitting back. He's saying, I'm not guilty of any of these things, and I've decided that I'm going to come at this in a strong manner. What's the latest on that?
Yes, the latest is that the judge has given permission for Jay-Z's lawyer to file a dismissal motion, which is a pretty incremental steps. In a lot of courts I cover, you don't need to ask the judge's permission to file a motion. But in Judge Torres's court in Manhattan, she has a court rule that attorneys in civil cases need to ask the court's permission via letter to file a motion. So Alex Spiro, Jay-Z's lawyer, asked permission in a letter recently. Tony Buzbee opposed, and the judge said, no, Jay-Z's lawyer is right, and he can go ahead and file a dismissal motion. Of course, that does not mean that she's going to dismiss the case. That has nothing to do with the merits of the pending dismissal motion, but that'll be filed on February 6th was the deadline. And one thing to keep in mind is that the standard for a dismissal motion is the judge is going to assume that all the allegations in the complaint are true. So it's about legal issues such as whether the claims are properly pled, whether a statute of limitations might apply, that kind of thing. And Jay-Z's lawyers previewed his arguments in his permission request letter, and he had three main arguments regarding whether one law, actually a state law where the statute of limitations is expired, whether that supersedes the law that this lawsuit was brought under. And then another argument he's making is that there's no indication that this assault occurred within New York City. And actually, he makes the argument that it had to have occurred outside of New York City, although they're still denying that this ever happened. But because the lawsuit is brought under a claim specific to New York City, that's one of their stronger arguments, is saying that there's nothing to the claim that this actually occurred in New York City. However, if a lawsuit gets dismissed or a complaint gets dismissed for a reason like that, it could be possible that the judge will give them leave to amend, and they can come back with another version of the complaint.
And Meghann, of course, like I mentioned, Diddy's also involved in this lawsuit that Jay-Z is named, and there's also a third unnamed celebrity that this then 13-year-old is claiming that was in the room at the time of the alleged assault. Let's talk about how these two are linked. Are they linked at all with Diddy's trial that's going on in that trial that will go on in New York, I should say, as well as this other complaint? Is this going to harm any of the issues that Jay-Z is now seeing, as well with his name being linked? Is that will they affect each other, these two cases?
And not that we know of. We know of no connection between the lawsuit and Diddy's case. The one interesting issue that could arise is if this does get to the discovery deposition phase, if it survives this dismissal motion, we could run into an interesting issue with the co-defendants. Diddy being a co-defendant in this and also being charged in a criminal case, he has every reason to not participate in a civil case like this through a deposition or discovery. And it would be really easy for his lawyers to get some kind of stay in place that would prevent him from having to participate until his criminal case is resolved. So that could be interesting to see how Jay-Z is able to proceed on that if his co-defendant is wanting to stay the case. I don't know if a stay could apply only to Diddy. Probably not, considering it's the same incident. But I do expect that we could start to see something like that arising if the dismissal motion isn't granted without leave to amend, and if Diddy's trial doesn't go through in May as planned, if he's still got this criminal case pending as this lawsuit is bubbling up.
Meghann, do you anticipate that this could even go to trial, or do you think that they will potentially settle before it gets to that point?
It seems like something that could go to trial. It also, there are many possible dismissal outcomes or summary judgment outcomes. The dismissal motion, like I said, the judge has to assume that all facts are true. But after deposition and discovery, a lot of the times we see summary judgment motions, which can involve outside information. And like one argument right now is Jay-Z's lawyer is saying that based on property records and other evidence, there's no indication that there's a house in New York City that matches the description. And Tony Busby turned around and said that that's not a proper argument for a dismissal motion because it brings in outside information. But if there was a summary judgment motion, stuff like that would be considered. And there's so much information, and we know now, that could be brought into a summary judgment motion that I think this seems like a case that's pretty ripe for a summary judgment motion, possibly, but that would come much later down the line.
Okay, Meghann, we know that you have so much experience in this area, and we were talking weeks ago about the YSL trial, how long it went on, and what the role that witnesses played in that, as well as how that impacted the jury. So at this point, we do know that there have been a number of discrepancies from the allegations and what Jay-Z and Diddy are saying on the other side, to say things didn't happen that way. What do you think that those potential jurors are going to be thinking at this moment when you know that this case happened so many years ago? Is that something that could affect their judgment?
It could, although I think we've seen, especially in the last few years, it's become a lot more common to see cases like that that were brought, from years ago, and given the plaintiff's age, and that could play into it. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that the jury could be thinking about, but of course, one thing that Diddy's team on his criminal case is concerned about is just all the publicity that these civil cases are getting, like this lawsuit against him and Jay-Z, is really not helping him in terms of a jury pool for his criminal case. And there's really not much they can do about that. They did try to get a gag order in place on civil attorneys in place through the criminal case, but the judge rejected it, said it was a really unprecedented move. But there's just kind of a lot to be known about this unknown jury that we could see seated in this case.
It is certainly something that's going to be interesting and that we're going to continue to follow. All right, Meghann's going to stay with us here. We're going to step away for a 2-minute break. On the other side, I'm not sure if you guys have been following this case. It's one of the biggest out there. We're talking about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni going back and forth with their filings and what they have to say. Like I said, Meghann's going to stay with us. We're going to take this break and discuss that in 2 minutes.